Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good, good, good. Well, I just was saying how appreciative Maeve and I are for this invitation to speak this afternoon. We know that you guys have had some very illustrious presenters in the past, a lot of experts. Maeve and I are not experts in conservation work or forest protection work or climate change policy. We're very much lay people, but we do love our trees, and we really love our redwood trees up here in Sonoma County. So we wanted to take this time this afternoon to tell you the story of our fight as a small grassroots group, the Guerneville Forest Coalition. Our fight to protect 224 acres of redwoods and Douglas firs here in Sonoma County. And we're going to be focusing on what we feel worked well for us, some of the things that we did that we felt were particularly effective and helped, and then also mention some of the things that perhaps were not so effective and did not work as well for us. And our hope here is that by sharing our experience, that we can encourage other people and other small groups to come together to fight some of these destructive logging plans that are so prevalent across our forested areas. And the land that we fought to protect has now been purchased by Save The Redwoods League. It was purchased in September for about $6.5 million. And in fact, Save the Redwoods purchased not just the 224 acres that we were fighting to protect, the area that was going to be logged, but they actually purchased 396 acres. So basically all of the lots that the timberland owner owned and could log. So we were really happy with that outcome and tremendously grateful to Save the Redwoods for stepping in. And they're not only going to protect the forest by placing it under a conservation easement, but they're also going to be working to restore it. This is an area that has been logged many, many times over about 150 years. So they're going to be working to restore the forest, working with the county of Sonoma itself. So I should mention that this forest is not virgin old growth forest. There are pockets of old growth, but it's mostly second and third growth trees. So that's important to know. So for those of you who don't know Guerneville, let me see if I can forward my slide. Here we go. So just to show you where we are geographically, we're the blue dot up at the top left-hand side there. We're about 90 miles, 80 miles north of San Francisco, 20 miles northwest of Santa Rosa. We are in the heart of the Russian River Valley, so well known for its Pinot Noirs and its Chardonnay. And Guerneville as a town is well known. It's a tourist town. It's on the river. It's very beautiful. So we have a lot of tourists. And we're well known for our redwood trees. In fact, we have a wonderful state park, Armstrong Woods State Park, which is full of ancient old growth redwoods. Really worth a visit if you can get there. So we're very proud of our little town and what surrounds it. Now, I should mention that these are coastal redwoods that we're talking about. So not the giant sequoias in the Sierra, but these are the tallest trees on the planet. They can live for more than 2,000 years. And unfortunately, the ancient coast redwoods, they're rare. I mean, only about 5%, less than 5% of the original forest remains today. And there's only about 23% of the total forest range that is actually protected. So we were very upset back in April 2020 when we discovered that a logging company called Redwood Empire, owned by a family, the Birch family, announced that they wanted to log this 224 acres of redwoods along the Russian River. This is about a mile southwest of Guerneville. And I should say that Redwood Empire owns about 200,000 acres of forest in California. So this is a very, very small percentage of their total ownership. But this is a map of the timber harvest area. You can see where it is in location to the Russian River. And you can see from the contours that this is a very hilly area, except for the area at the bottom there, the south. This is a much flatter area. In fact, it's called the Clar Flats. And this is an important area because it's home to a 2,000-year-old redwood called the Clar Tree, named after the family that originally owned the area. And the Clar Tree, it's stunning. It's a majestic redwood. It's about 280 feet tall. It was 330 feet up until last winter when unfortunately a storm came in and lopped the top off of it. The top of the tree was actually dead because it'd been hit by lightning so many times. And the storm took the top off. So it's not quite as tall as it was, but it's still one of the tallest trees in Sonoma County. And we believe it's still probably the tallest tree on private property in the world. So it's an absolute stunning tree. So we were very concerned, although this tree was not going to be logged, they couldn't log it because of its age, the trees around it would be. And we were very concerned that this would put the tree at risk from high winds and that the logging would damage the mycorrhizal network under the tree. And so we were very concerned that the tree would not survive this timber harvest plan. And here's a picture of the Clar Tree. It's not a very good one, but this is taken from the bottom up. It really doesn't show it in all its glory, but at least you can get some idea of what it looks like. Now, I should mention that the THP, the Timber Harvest Plan, was not a clear cut. They weren't going to take out all the trees, but they were going to use a form of silviculture called group selection. And this meant that areas of forest of up to 2 acres in size would be clear cut. So this would be a patchwork of mini clear cuts across the plan area. And this photo shows a hillside. I'm not quite sure where this is, but it's you can see a hillside where they've used group selection silviculture. And this is a hillside where the logging plan that we're dealing with was would be affected. This is Neely Hill from the river, and this hillside would be an area where they were going to be doing group selection. So you would see, these 2 acre mini clear cuts along the river. And what also horrified us was not just the fact that we're going to be taking out these beautiful, incredible trees and destroy the ecosystem in the process, but that they were going to do so on very steep slopes in an area of landslide susceptibility. There'd been many landslides in this area with a very high risk of erosion and along a river that's already impaired for water quality. And in addition to all of that, up until 2020, Sonoma County had some really bad wildfires. We had the Tubbs Fire, the Kincaid Fire. And so now this logging company was coming along and we're going to be taking out these huge fire-resistant redwood trees, leaving behind the combustible brush species, the tan oaks and the bay laurels. And we knew from what happened in the town of Paradise in 2018, Paradise in California, that this would leave our community more vulnerable to high wind fire events. So we were very concerned about the fire risk. And then if that wasn't enough, 96% of the plan area is in a scenic corridor, the 116 scenic corridor. And 60% of the plan area could be seen from Highway 116. Now, this is the main tourist route through Sonoma County over to the coast. So we were really concerned that this plan would have an impact on tourism. And along with the wine industry, tourism is one of the biggest generators of revenue for our county. So we were really concerned about this. So that gives you the context of what we were up against. So now let's focus on what we did and what worked and what didn't work. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the sort of administrative stuff we did and the publicity. And then Maeve is going to talk about the legal and the political side of things. So after we heard about the plan to log this area, a group of neighbors and local residents got together and we decided that we wanted to fight it. So we created this little scrappy group called the Guerneville Forest Coalition that we hoped would generate support and do whatever we could to try to, if not stop the plan, then at the very least amend it so that it wasn't so destructive. And we immediately threw ourselves into reading the plan and trying to understand it. But this is a 500-page document that is incredibly dense, incredibly complex, full of jargon that none of us understood. And we really felt out of our depth and we're really not sure what we should be doing. So the first thing we did that worked really well, and it probably is the most important thing when I think about it, the thing that really helped us more than anything, was that we found an incredible local resource in an organization called Forest Unlimited. And in particular, its executive director, Rick Coates. And hopefully Rick is on the call today, so I want to shout out to him. Rick was just a goldmine of information and agreed to join us or join our working group as an advisor. And this meant that we had access to a wealth of knowledge about logging practices and fighting THPs and dealing with CalFire, the regulatory agency. And more importantly, Forest Unlimited agreed to become our fiscal sponsor. So very quickly, we were able to start fundraising because we didn't have to go through the red tape of creating a 501c3 organization. So that was something that helped us enormously. The second thing we did was that in fact, we were told by this is the website for Forest Unlimited. Just wanted to give a shout out to them. And the second thing we did was we were told early on that, if you want to be taken seriously, you've got to have a really professional looking website. So we immediately started working on creating a website using a very user-friendly website creation web hosting service called Squarespace that allowed us to design the site ourselves. We didn't have to employ any designers, and we could update the site very quickly without a lot of effort. And we used the website to immediately start to publicize our work. We were able to sign up supporters through the website. So we started to create this email list of supporters. And then we were able to send out news and email blasts and newsletters to people. And this was really helpful because I think very quickly our supporters list grew and grew. And I think we ended up with around 300, 350 people on the list who we could we could target and send information to and fundraise with. So that was a very important first step. We also immediately created an online social media presence through Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And we set up a little social media subgroup. So we had our working group of about 15 to 16 people. And then we set up 3 subgroups: social media, legal, and fundraising. And the social media subgroup, there's like 3 of us who just figured out, okay, what do we want to post? What are going to be the interesting stories? And how regularly do we want to post things so that we don't overwhelm people, but we keep ourselves top of mind? And so we planned all of these things out so that people would be getting the facts from us as we saw them. And one thing we did early on that didn't work probably that well was that we initially created some flyers that we would post around town and put online. But we realized they were a little bit too scary. They were a bit dramatic, and we got some pushback from people around, you're just trying to scaremonger. And remember, this was a logging community in the past. Guerneville used to be called Stumptown back in the late 1800s because it lost all its trees through logging. So there was still a lot of people in the community who had a sort of affinity with the timber industry. So, we didn't have everyone on our side, and we didn't want to alienate people by, the sky is falling. So we made an effort after that to really just post the facts and to be as informative and factual as we possibly could. We also started an online petition through change.org. We had about 3,000 people sign the petition, and we set up a GoFundMe page, which raised around 7,000, part of our fundraising. But what we learned early on, what really scared us, was that the rules that were meant to regulate the logging industry in California and protect communities like ours were written about 40 years ago, primarily by the timber industry, by lobbyists in Sacramento. And the most egregious discovery was that the THP, the Timber Harvest Plan itself, was considered or acted as its own environmental impact study. So there wasn't a separate environmental impact report done by anyone independent. The environmental impacts were done by the forester. And so this was the proverbial fox in charge of the henhouse. And worse yet, we then discovered that the Board of Forestry, or CalFire, as it's known in California, this is the regulatory body that would review and approve the THP. We found out that it consisted primarily of board members who were very sympathetic to the timber logging industry, to big timber, and that CalFire itself was staffed by a revolving door of employees from the timber industry. So, we were told early on, and quite realistically, I think, that we would never get CalFire to reject this timber harvest plan, despite its numerous flaws and erroneous conclusions. CalFire rarely rejects timber harvest plans. And the only way to really stop them is to go through the courts once the plan is approved. So we realized we had to start fundraising pretty quickly to raise enough money to go that route if we needed to. Now, naively at the beginning, and this didn't work well, we thought that CalFire as a state agency might be willing to come out and speak to us and perhaps talk to the local community, have a meeting, tell us, what they might be doing, and we could reflect our concerns. But they didn't want to know. They weren't interested in doing that. And basically, they just told us that we had to submit our comments through email or through letters to them. And that at the end of the review process, once they had approved the plan, they would then comment on our concerns. So as you can see, the deck was stacked against us. So we had to reshuffle it somehow. So the third thing that worked, we think, really, on reflection, was that we knew we had to send in as many public comments as possible to CalFire so that they would have to wade their way through all of them and eventually respond with their official response. And our hope was that by slowing things down, we would buy some time for us to fundraise and, hopefully raise enough money that if we had to, we could mount a legal challenge. So the first thing we did was we made sure that our growing list of supporters knew how to send in their comments. So they had the email address. They knew that they had to put a THP number on their emails, or else the comments would just probably fall into, just disappear. So we made sure that they knew exactly how to send in their comments, and we gave them pointers what to talk about, some of the key areas that we were concerned about. We also managed to find some local experts and organizations that were willing to submit comments. So, for example, we found a retired hydrologist, who reviewed the THP and found numerous false assumptions related to landslide risks. And he put together a couple of detailed reports that we were able to send, or he sent in to CalFire. This is an example of one of those, a graphic from one of those reports. So that was very helpful. And we also researched and submitted as many detailed studies related to things like fire risk. Here's an example of one here. We sent in as many of these as we could. These were all scientific papers, academic papers, peer-reviewed. Again, the goal here was that CalFire would have to review all of these comments and these papers and these studies. They would also form part of the administrative record, so that if we had to sue later on, these were materials that we could go to court and say, look, we highlighted our concerns. Here are some very independent studies and reports conducted by experts that show how flawed this plan is. So we knew we had to build this administrative record, because once the public comment period was over, that's it. You don't have a second chance. So we even managed to get Sonoma County Department of Public Works and Permit Sonoma, the planning department, to send in their comments. Maeve will talk about those in a second. And our strategy here was clear, deluge CalFire with as many substantive public comments as possible so that they would have to spend the time reviewing this. And it worked. Over the course of 2 years, CalFire had to postpone their decision about whether to approve the THP 24 times over an 18-month period. And in total, they had to review over 400 public comments, of about a quarter of which were pretty detailed, substantive comments. So this really slowed them down and gave us the time to fundraise and publicize. So that brings me to the next thing we did, I think worked and we did well, was the publicity. We knew that we had to have a unified voice. We had to stay on message. So we developed a set of talking points. We nominated one person to be our media spokesperson. That was John Dunlap, who you can see in this photo. And we contacted certain journalists, environmental reporters, our local paper, the Press Democrat. We sent letters to the editor. You can see some of them here. And we got front page in a number of important local publications. As you can see, here's a front page here showing John looking at the THP area. So we really worked hard at getting the word out there. And again, we put a lot of information on our website for journalists to use. We created a news blog, we issued press releases, and we spoke to them one-on-one. So they knew who to come to for information. And then during the summer, one summer, we put a big yellow banner along the river that said, "Protect the Clar Tree," with our logo. And as chance would have it, a journalist from the San Francisco Chronicle was kayaking up the river and he saw the banner and he called us and he said, "What's going on here?" And that resulted in a front page article in the San Francisco Chronicle talking about the plight of the Clar Tree and our work to try to save the forest, which created even more publicity and helped us with fundraising. So I'm going to hand over to Maeve, and Maeve is going to talk a little bit about the political and the legal aspects to our work.
Colin, thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can.
Wonderful. I apologize, everyone. My internet has been a little funky since it rained on Friday, and I'm waiting for the ISP to come out and repair it. So I'll be off camera. And please tell me if I start to not be you're not able to hear me. I really want to thank Colin, particularly for his incredible humility around his communications leadership. As you may have already gathered, we have learned that the diverse talent of our neighbors and community in our coalition are critical to our success in protecting the community and the ecosystem over the last 3 years. As Colin shared, the California Forest Protection Act, which governs logging in California, is a complex and honestly scary web of rules and process administered by CalFire while they're fighting fires, active fires, and considered to be the equivalent of an EIR, which is supposed to ensure public participation. However, we've learned that the law which has really impacted our lives since 2020 when we received those notices. And it was actually January 2020 when my 83-year-old dad handed me a piece of paper from the forester saying that our surface water might be impacted. And he said, "This doesn't sound good, kid." And thankfully, via Nextdoor, of all places, I met this incredible group of people. We were really worried about this plan to log these very steep hillsides above and around our homes and over the incredible Russian River. So by summer 2020, most of us had a copy, or many of us, of the Solano Press's Guide to the California Forest Practice Act, and we were deep into 932 pages of that law. And as we went deeper and deeper, we received, as Colin shared, trusted partners advised us, like Forest Unlimited and Rick Coates, particularly, agencies, attorneys. Many of our safety concerns were actually not going to be considered by CalFire because they were political matters. And so our concerns about the Neely Hill landside complex, the failed culvert, which ran under the proposed harvest site and our primary artery in and out of our homes, and then also right down into the river, as well as living in a neighborhood with a history of falling trees, both into and onto our homes. So as we moved forward with what worked and what didn't within the THC process, and in addition to the incredible communications efforts, our team collaborated regularly over Zoom for 3 years. And to understand those levers, political and legal, and to develop strategies and resources so we could use them and move forward. The next slide shows one of our first victories. And this is before the logging plan. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I think someone, thank you, Karen. Before the private logging is approved, CalFire actually has to gather all the state agencies from geology to wildlife for a pre-harvest inspection. And during this inspection, the California Geological Survey engineering geologists assigned to the THP found, in fact, the neighbors were right, that there was a public safety hazard along our only year-round artery, Neely Road. And in his letters, the geologist wrote to CalFire and entered, this is critical, into the public record, that, as he stated at the preliminary harvest inspection, because Neely Road is the only access route for residences in Vacation Beach and Etondale communities, the California Geological Survey considers the potential for adverse impacts to Neely Road a hazard to public safety. Adverse impacts to Neely Road could block emergency access to existing residences and could disrupt utilities along Neely Road. This single finding and letter created two levers we could use. One is an adverse impact, which in an EIR, which could be a basis for a lawsuit. And the second was a finding of a public safety hazard by a state agency. Frustratingly, after some pretty unbelievable administrative steps, CalFire found that they didn't have an issue here with the increased runoff and running logging trucks over this failed culvert, because they could just decide it was simply not part of the timber harvest plan. But the hazard remained for our community. And in his final letter, the California Geological Survey geologist said, well, you know what? It's a county issue. And he put in writing, shifting the liability from the state to the county for this. And from there, we use this as one of the many talking points that Colin discussed with our local elected politicians about preserving the public safety around this proposed logging. And so we began early speaking with those with lived experience, with working with such agencies and friends and connections within the activist community, as well as the land trust and open space community. As a conservation easement was never considered in the timber harvest plan, we not only added that lack of consideration for a sale into the administrative record with CalFire, but we kept in regular contact with the Open Space District and various land trusts in Sonoma, Bodega, Marin. We also contacted the County Planning Department Permit Sonoma regarding the scenic highway that Colin mentioned and the damage that could be done to that designation, and the buffer zone around the Clar Tree. We contacted Public Works regarding the culverts and the road impacts, and we carefully used our talking points to strongly share the negative objective impacts to our community, to our neighbors. We excitedly also got 2 resolutions passed by the Sonoma County Democratic Party in support of our efforts, and those were sent to the Board of Supervisors, our governing agency as an unincorporated community in Sonoma. And this is huge props to many of my neighbors, including John and Christina and Dorian, we creatively pushed to set up meetings with our local supervisor and her team. And we're always prepared with our talking points. When we found her attention understandably focused on other community concerns, including wildfire and the unhoused community, and some of her local team members not very responsive, Colin used technology to bring her back to the table with an incredible website marketing tool, which allowed all of our supporters with the click of a button to send our local supervisor an email. And we were not surprised that she showed up at the next meeting. And that was a wonderful lever. Next slide, please. So in response to the CalFire effort to exclude the repair of the failed culvert under our main artery and the public safety hazard that created, political pressure, including this letter from the Sonoma County Department of Public Works, pushed on CalFire. So again, in their letter, the Department of Public Works, Sonoma County, used those magic words. I am advised that CalFire's refusal to incorporate the culvert requirements into the THP constitutes inadequate mitigation of an identified potential significant impact under CEQA, and as the functional equivalent of an EIR under CEQA must comply with basic principles regarding adequate mitigation of potential significant impacts. In this respect, the Silver Estates THP falls short of complying with basic CEQA requirements. And this was, again, entered into the public record with CalFire, giving us a basis for suit, but again, proved fruitful with the county's recognition of, if this was not addressed, the issue would fall to the county. On the next slide, we'll dig in a little bit to the political and legal issue of the scenic route. As Colin shared, our rural riverside community sits halfway between the incredible California coast and US Highway 101, which runs from LA to Washington State. California 116, the Gravenstein Highway, named after the incredible Luther Burbank created apple, is protected under state law after earning designation for its outstanding scenic qualities. We agree, as do a large number of local, regional, international tourists that come to visit. To secure and maintain our scenic highway designation, the local government with jurisdiction over the abutting land must adopt a scenic corridor protection program that limits development, outdoor advertising, and earth moving. And the state must agree that our local government meets that criteria. So as Colin mentioned, a significant portion of the proposed logging would put this designation and tourism driver at risk. In our letters, our team repeatedly requested a viewshed analysis, professional viewshed assessment of the proposed logging impact. Sadly, CalFire accepted the logging company's forester driving around the community in his truck, saying everything would be okay from where he stopped and looked. The same was his approach to the Clar Tree. However, after engaging in conversations with agencies, elected officials, and bringing forward more evidence and scientific proof, our county said different. And again, we had a political and legal win. On the next slide, you see Permit Sonoma's clear request of CalFire to have a professional visual assessment be completed of the potential impacts of the logging, and their request for an expanded buffer around the Clar Tree, or a scientific reason why CalFire was neglecting such a buffer. And while CalFire went on to approve this plan, we are delighted that to have used novel technology and some wonderful tourism grants to complete a viewshed assessment of the harm of this logging plan. And so with the support of our county supervisor to apply for a tourism grant and the help of Graham and others, we researched and found who would complete such a thing, because the county didn't know, and to hire some incredible landscape architects from San Francisco. And with that, they used technology they themselves had not used before. They traveled up to the river and met with John and Colin, and from multiple vantage points, then used GIS to map every tree and to estimate where these mini clear cuts would fall, and give us a view of how that would look both from Highway 116, but also for paddlers moving along the river or swimmers. And so this was too late to include in the administrative record, but again, established for if we needed to go to court, that the agency and the logger failed to engage in a complete analysis of the potential harm to our land and our community, and became another lever. The next efforts that we undertook, some successful, some not, were to engage our state agencies and electeds. And I really want to give a nod to the relentless efforts of our teammate, John, who worked almost weekly to see if our state senator could speak with us. And when he did, he read an executive summary of our talking points, and really suggested strongly, not only he would work with the county and CalFire, but the pursuit of a sale would be wise. We did not have similar success with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the North Coast Regional Water Control Board. The Fish and Wildlife was deeply hesitant to be involved and to take wildlife concerns seriously. Oddly, all animals that live near us moved off the land in time for every inspection. And the water board, despite listening intently to our neighbors, Dorian and Christina's worries of landslide and road failure, and adding some protections for logging near the sanitary treatment facility, did not act on current Clean Water Act violations that were existing. So we found these experiences deeply frustrating, but it allowed our team to model something I think has been saving grace, which is keep moving forward. If a door closes, find a window. Just keep moving. On the next slide, as we began to prepare for this legal battle that Colin mentioned, early on, we again benefited from those who've gone before. And these are our neighbors at Felta Creek, who again had experience with taking failed and messy CalFire plans to court, successfully and not successfully, as well as in front of the water board. So we're deeply grateful for the model that they generously shared. And this is their website. The next site, you will see all of the other organizations that really, from the start, were generous with their time and energy and technical assistance. We are truly grateful to Forest Unlimited, particularly Rick Coates, at our side as a voice of experience and expertise and candor about California logging from the start. His early connection of our team to the resources of EPIC, the Environmental Protection Information Center, and Stop Clearcut California's campaign, which sponsored Learn How to Respond to a Timber Harvest Plan, we will be forever grateful for. Also receptive and so helpful to our team were other scrappy groups, Friends of the Guala River, SCA, Russian River Keeper, Friends of the Guala River, helping us financially with publicity and or fundraising, as well as context and history. Brenda Edelman helped us deeply with understanding what was going on with the land at the sanitary treatment facility. Some organizations were less helpful. They expressed concern with their jeopardizing their relationship with the timberland owner, Roger Birch, and didn't want to antagonize him. And we understood that. Others didn't really know what to do with us. We were small and scrappy and just starting, but we just kept moving forward and worked with all those who were willing to partner, including local climate activists, to gain more supporters and publicity. From all of this technical assistance and capacity building, we were able from the start to frugally use legal advocacy to our benefit. And the first was local state senator and environmental attorney Noreen Evans, who wrote a strong letter that became part of the record from the start to signal to CalFire that we were aware that the plan was insufficient and we would litigate unless it was improved. This letter was followed up by the next letter we share from an incredible biologist and attorney, Jenny Loda, who we were connected to by our law offices that supported us. She had prior experience at the Center for Biological Diversity and wrote a significant multi-page letter to CalFire on our behalf, reminding them of their obligations to the environment, to the community, and providing them with that we would move forward with litigation. And sadly, when the plan was approved, after all of those delays, we did. And due to the work of Ed Yates, our attorney, we were able to secure a TRO immediately. And this stopped the THP in court, and it stopped what we feared, the winter logging that CalFire approved. And this also got CalFire and Mr. Birch to the table for required settlement conferences. And I share this slide with the heart of David versus Goliath. We were a group of neighbors represented by a solo practitioner speaking with a state agency represented by the Attorney General's office and a transglobal law firm, Paul Hastings, representing the landowner. Mr. Yates asked Colin, Rick, and I to all speak plainly and candidly about our concerns for safety and that this logging plan was not okay to move forward with. As we spoke, the big law attorney from Paul Hastings went off camera, and the AG and the CalFire attorneys listened and offered help. The corporate attorney came back on camera finally and asked for time to respond. And we knew that we had again brought forward clear and convincing evidence that this plan was not going to be safe for our community. So we did not agree to any cease of the temporary restraining order without written commitments. We had prior experience with this logger, particularly his mom on Facebook advocating for the logging plan and other efforts that we just didn't trust moving forward without something in writing. And so it was our delight that on this next slide, where you see the last teeny tiny bits of the Clar Tree that are not there anymore, that Mr. Birch decided he would entertain regional offers. And our supervisor, Linda Hopkins, picked up the phone and called him. And from there, we are deeply grateful to all of our community members who've reached out to Save the Redwoods and made this happen, including organizing incredible philanthropic bridge funding.
Bob, are you there? We can't hear you. Huh?
Karen, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Yeah, we're pretty much at the end of the presentation there. I'm not sure what happened to me, but we were just going to summarize, what worked and what didn't work. I won't go through all of this, but you can see here some of the key things that we felt were successful and some of the things that less effective. But I know we're running out of time for questions, so why don't we leave it there and hand it back to you.
Okay, thank you both so much. That was just tremendous. I can't overstate it. So Kristen, can you ask some of the questions that you find in chat?
I will. First of all, Colin and Maeve, thank you so much for your wonderful report. This is so inspiring to us, and I'm sure it's very inspiring for some local communities. By the way, someone just said, can you please put the visual back on so that they can take a photo of the summary? And also, we wanted to let you know we will send out the recording after it is done as well. Okay. And I think they were looking at the summary. Is that what you're all looking for? I think so. Okay, so I'm going to start at the top. So the first question was, can you please, Colin, repeat, of the 5% of the coastal redwoods remaining, what percentage is protected?
Oh, it's gosh, I think it's let me remind myself here, it's a very small amount. 23% of the total forest range is protected.
23% of the total forest range. And somebody was asking, I think, about the 5% of old growth, I think.
Yes, so only 5% old growth remains of old growth redwood trees remains now, only 5%. So there's second growth, obviously third growth, but of the original ancient forest, only 5%, less than 5% remain.
Okay, and of that 5%, is that where there's a 23% protected, or is it, how much of that 5% of the old growth is protected?
I don't know. I don't know how much is protected. Sorry. Yeah.
That's okay. I think that's what our listener was curious about, but thank you for sharing that. So the second question that I received is, does the Save the Redwood League's plan to thin these redwoods that were sold to them and protected?
We don't know yet. We're talking to Save the Redwoods about their plans. The plan is to create a conservation easement, and they want to do some restorative forestry work. So that might involve some thinning to improve the forest, the health of the forest. But it's still early days. We're still waiting to hear from them to find out what exactly they're planning.
Thank you, Colin. And then another question: after a recent wildfire, Save the Redwood League did a bunch of clear cutting in Alder Creek Grove of the giant sequoias. Although sequoias often survive wildfire, the question for you is, how do you think Save the Redwood Leagues will protect this area in the long term?
Mm-hmm. Well, the plan actually is to hand it over to the county of Sonoma in about a year's time, and we think probably the open space district. So we will work with Save the Redwoods now, and then also with the county to make sure that the conservation easement is in place. There's also going to be some recreational covenants, we believe, developed. But we're still actively involved. And the nice thing is that Save the Redwoods has been very open with us and willing to work with us, and for us to work with their land management team. So we're excited to team up with them and make sure that the best outcome is achieved.
Okay, great. And so here's another question. Who will oversee the cutting activity to make sure these mini cuts, such as in the plan you mentioned, are only cut in small areas? I think at this point, it seems like this particular part of the forest is probably exempt from that right now.
Yes.
Right, Colin?
That's right. Yes. Yeah. So, no group selection. That's completely off the board. So, it was a horrible THP with these mini clear cuts, and we're so relieved that that's not going to happen. It would have been disastrous for the forest.
Yeah, and so this question is from someone from Oregon, and the question also says, how do you know how timber cuts in California are usually monitored and controlled at the time of the cuts?
Well, CalFire, together with some of the other state agencies, such as Department of Fish and Wildlife, are meant to be involved in monitoring. How good a job they do is sort of debatable. I think that, we were not very confident in our dealings with the state agencies that they would, and the regulatory agencies, that they would necessarily be on top of all of that. So we were really concerned that there wouldn't be appropriate oversight if the logging were to go ahead. We became really despondent the more we dealt with CalFire and Fish and Wildlife, we lost confidence in them. So yeah, it's a really good question, and it's something that I think a lot of people, certainly a lot of environmentalists in California, are concerned about. And I think there's hopefully steps underway to try to change that, in Sacramento, is to get a groundswell of people to recognize that our state agencies aren't really working for us right now in this respect.
Thank you, Colin. So here's another one. What was the tool that made it easy to send emails to your supervisor?
Oh, yeah, this was just a sort of marketing tool through our website provider, where we were able to basically just send a link to our supporters, and they clicked on the link, and an email would automatically be populated. Their email would come up populated with the email address of our supervisor and some talking points. Now, they could then change those talking points if they wanted to, or they could just press send, and that email went straight to her inbox. And it really worked, because I think we only had to use it once, but we weren't getting any feedback from her office. It'd been a couple of months. We hadn't heard anything. We'd asked for meetings. We weren't getting anywhere. So we used this tool, and she immediately got about 15 to 20 emails. And the next day, her office phoned us and said she wanted to meet with us. So it was great.
So that was the tool that you used to bring her back around.
Exactly. Get back to the table.
Okay, that's fantastic. Okay, so another question. Is it possible to repeat what it was that had the county taking over this process that allowed your organization to work then more locally?
Not sure I understand. What allowed us to work with the county better?
Yeah, well, I think at first you had talked about you were working with the state, and then the state said, no, this isn't our jurisdiction. It's the counties.
Yes.
how did that shift happen, and was that a good thing?
Yeah, it was complex, actually. Yes, that was related to the landslide risk and the geological survey. So the state did this survey, and the geological survey, CGS, the state agency, and said that, they were concerned with the landslide risk and particularly this failing culvert. And then because the culvert was half on the land, on the timberland owner's property, the logging area, and half of it was on county land, the state basically said, well, we can't give a permit for fixing this culvert. That's the county's responsibility. So we're not even going to consider this. And then the state geological agency said, okay, well, if that's the case, we're passing liability to the county. The state's not going to be liable. So we then went to the county and said, are you aware that this is happening? And are you prepared to have liability, the safety risk here of this road collapsing? And that's when the county sent a letter to CalFire saying that the logging plan, in fact, not only was that not acceptable, that because of that, the plan was in violation of CEQA, which was a major piece of information to get into the administrative record for us.
That seems like a pivotal moment.
Yeah, I think it really helped it really helped the county to see that we were on top of this and that they should be on top of it as well. And that they couldn't just ignore both us and what was happening at a state level. So both the Department of Public Works at a county level and Permit Sonoma started to get more actively involved. And as you see, wrote those public comments to CalFire. So yeah, it was a turning moment.
Great. So here's a detailed question about trout and other species. So are there any steelhead trout that run in creeks that drain the protected acres, and any other listed species such as California red-legged frogs?
Well, this was the other area of contention related to wildlife surveys, was that, they were conducted by the forester or his, the companies that he employed to do the surveys. And we were never allowed to see those. They weren't in the THP, or the details weren't. And we really felt that, there were omissions there. I mean, give you a good example of this. So the northern spotted owl, I can't speak so much to the the frog, but the northern spotted owl was, we knew highly suspected that there were owls on the property. And the forester originally, or his wildlife experts, went out during the day to look for the northern spotted owl. Well, I think, we all know they don't come out during the day. So they claimed there were no spotted owls on the property. So Fish and Wildlife did give them their credit. They came back and said, well, you got to go out at night. So the forester went out at dusk and dawn, not during the night, and came back and said, yeah, there's a pair of spotted owls on the perimeter of the property. So that was just an example of how these wildlife surveys were poorly conducted or not conducted at all. So it was hard for us to really know. We couldn't afford our own surveys, not that they would allow us to do them, private property. But this was a real problem. We just did not know what really was there. And when we did suspect that other wildlife, endangered species possibly were being missed. Yeah.
Interesting. So I want to do a quick time check with Karen. Karen and Colin, have you discussed whether it's okay to go past 5?
I would ask Colin and Maeve if they can go a little longer.
Yeah, I can, for sure. Yeah, I think we've lost Maeve.
I'm here. I'm so sorry I fell off. My apologies. But Colin's doing a beautiful job. He is our communication lead.
Okay, because you can see lots of people are inspired by this and very curious. So the big question, how much was it to buy it?
The land? The cost of the land? Yeah, Save the Redwoods paid $6.5 million for the land. Yeah, a lot of money. They launched a fundraising campaign. Some of you may have seen it, online campaign. They produced a wonderful video showing the Clar Tree. They really did a wonderful job of showcasing the land and renamed it Russian River Redwoods. So they really have done a wonderful job of showcasing how beautiful it is. Yeah, and they raised the money.
So that's great. And so can you recap the final resolution and just one of the readers had said it was bought and put into a conservation easement of some sort. How would you describe the final outcome?
Well, we're in the process now of working with Save the Redwoods to finalize, or to start the ball rolling, I should say, in terms of creating this conservation easement. So that's the exciting thing, is that we're going to be talking to them about what that's going to look like. And I say they've offered to work with us very closely. So, they only bought the land in September, so it's still, early days in terms of figuring out how and when the easement will be put in place and the transfer to Sonoma County. But, we're in touch with all of these, the county as well as the open space district. And so we're not there yet, but hopefully within the next year or 18 months, we should have more news to tell people.
Great. Okay. In the end, here's another question. In the end, was it buying the property that saved it? Or would the logging plan have been suspended otherwise?
Well, buying the property meant the logging, the commercial logging would not take place. I mean, we knew that once the timberland owner had sold the property, he's out of the equation, so to speak. So that really was the most significant step. But I have to say, I think we had a good case. And if it had gone to, we had gone to court with the timberland owner and CalFire, I like to think that we would have had a good shot at, if not stopping the plan completely, at least significantly amending it, getting it amended.
Great. So another person messaged me to ask, is there a plan to monitor the thinning and restoration work that is planned for this land?
That's what we're going to talk to Save the Redwoods about. Yeah. So we do want to be involved. So as I say, they have expressed willingness to involve us and work with us. So our hope is that, that we'll be involved in that.
Great. And I think you already mentioned the spotted owl and somewhat, but one person did say, can you comment further on CalFire's protection of endangered species? Were there any other species of concern?
Yeah, there were a few. I mean, the marbled murrelet, we were concerned. We suspected that may, even though we're fairly far inland from the coast, these are seabirds that nest in redwoods. So we were concerned about that in particular. There was, I mean, the northern spotted owl was the one that we felt we had the strongest case, because we knew there was this nesting pair on the edge of the property. Other endangered or rare species, we just weren't too sure about. We suspected they were there. Certainly the fish, the salmon, the fact that the river is impaired for sediment already. We were making the case that this is only going to make that worse. And of course, the tributaries that lead into the river. So, yes, we were really concerned about a number of different species. Osprey, although not endangered, they nest all along this part of the river, and there was some nesting osprey in the plan area, on the edge of the plan area. This was the other interesting thing, was that what we found was that, as Maeve referenced, when we spoke to CalFire, when we and the forester about the wildlife species, they either said that they couldn't be detected, or then we said, well, how did you try to detect them? And they wouldn't give us a clear answer. And or they would say, no, there's no evidence, based on the sort of studies that have been done in that area. So it just seemed really weak to us that, this just wasn't. There wasn't enough concrete information for us to feel confident that they were accurate, they were right. So it was just really scary that they would go ahead and approve a plan where the information seemed so nebulous.
Right. So a couple more people are still interested in being reminded of the name of the email tool that you used to generate all of those emails that went to the supervisor. I think lots of inspiration. People would like to maybe go out and try out that specific tool.
Well, it was through the website hosting company that called Squarespace.
Okay.
So they have a whole suite of marketing tools that you can use when you create a website with them. So, for example, not only can you send out email blasts to your supporters list, but you can create online newsletters. You can open a little shop and sell merchandise if you want to raise money that way. So it really is quite a nice, nimble, flexible tool that you can use however you decide. But we particularly like that a bit, that possibility of very easily getting mass email sent to supervisors or politicians. So it was but it was Squarespace is the name of the company that we used.
Yeah, thank you. That sounds very effective. So what's next for Guerneville Forest Protection Group?
Well, next is working with Save the Redwoods and making sure that we have a clear idea of their plans, and also working with Sonoma County, who are going to be taking over stewardship of the land, making sure that we know what they're planning. We would love to, at some point, see the area opened up a little bit for public access, particularly from the river. We would love people to be able to see the Clar Tree without doing too much, or any damage. So in time, we would love for there to be trails or access points so that people can just enjoy the space, because it truly is a wonderful area. So that's what we hope, and that's our goal.
Great. And by the way, in these, amongst all the questions are huge kudos, appreciation for what you do. One person said this story deserves a documentary film. Thank you for this amazing work. You've really inspired a lot of people through everything you've done.
Great. Well, that's wonderful. And that's why we wanted to share this with people today. So thank you to you and to Karen for allowing us to have this opportunity. And I hope it does inspire people. And as Maeve said earlier, don't give up. If you're fighting one of these plans, just give it your all. There were many times during the 3 years that we thought, why are we doing this? Because we don't stand a chance. And then a white knight came along at the last moment and, stepped in and saved the land. So it worked out.
Colin, can you quit sharing your screen? And then I want to ask you, would it be okay if we share these slides on our website also, along with the recording? Because I think people would like to have that. So thank you so much. I think we learned a lot and we got inspired, and maybe I have a videographer to turn you on to do a video on this. So we'll see if he's interested in this or not.
Yeah, so by the way, do you have any more time for questions, Karen, or do you want to close it out?
I think it sounded like your last question was the closing question. That's why you asked him the next steps. So that sort of sounded like that was the end.
I see. There's a bunch more questions. So let us go. Colin and Karen, would you like to proceed or not?
I'm happy to, but I'll let Karen decide.
Okay, let's do 10 more minutes and then stop.
Okay, the next question is there any continuing need for fundraising to cover the purchase price?
No, it's been purchased. Save the Redwoods, they did a great job of fundraising. They got a very significant donation from our local tribe up here, the Grayton Rancheria, because this was their ancestral land, and so they were very keen to see it preserved and conserved. So they got a lot of money, which allowed them to move forward with the purchase, and the purchase is done. Yeah.
Okay, great. And I think you mentioned that it's the county that will own the property long-term. Is that right? Somebody was just wanting to be sure.
Yeah, Save the Redwoods will be transferring it to Sonoma County. We're not sure quite what agency. We suspect it will be the Open Space District, because that's the agency that does conserve a lot of the lands in Sonoma, public lands there. So we hope it's them. But yes, it will be under county ownership.
Great. And I do see the comment from Maeve. So in some ways, this is also for the viewing audience listening later. So another listener says, how can we be sure that we can trust the Save the Redwood Leagues given some past history? Yeah,
well, again, we haven't stopped the lawsuit per se, right? We haven't, it's still there. They have purchased the land, so they have also inherited this lawsuit. So we do have some, some clout still, some sway, but they have been incredibly open and transparent with us, and they seem to be very willing to work with us and hear our ideas and our concerns. So so we'll see, right? Time will tell, but so far so good.
And by the way, there's a bunch of questions that were answered by Maeve in the chat, and I'm wondering, Maeve, how would you suggest to handle these? Because they've been answered in the chat.
I was hoping that would be okay, but does that cause challenges?
That's great.
For people
No, I think it's great.
listening?
I think
what I'll do, Kristen, is just add the chat to what I send out to the people who registered for this meeting.
Yeah, that's absolutely
a
great.
portion of it.
Okay, so we'll cover those and those are already covered in the chat. Someone asked, will we get an email of this recording? Yes, absolutely you will, assuming you're on our mailing list. And if you're not, feel free to sign up. And you've been signed up if you've registered for this Zoom call, by the way. And the question was asked just a couple of times just to be sure, was it buying the property that saved it? But it seems like that's been answered by Colin, that it kind of was the buying of the property that saved it.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And someone else asked, can you ask the Save the Redwood Leagues to provide DBH limits during their possible future thinning treatments? And Rick Coates mentioned they have not decided yet.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, they haven't. I don't think we can, I can't answer that right now.
Yeah, that's so understandable. And someone asked, are you still accepting donations? And Maeve said yes.
We are. Yep. Yeah.
And lots more appreciation for you. And when we send the chat out, you'll be able to take the time to read all of the appreciation.
Great. Thank you.
So I think let's see. Yeah, we're going to send the follow-up email with all the info in one place. So the other question was, are there any co-management opportunities or plans for the tribe?
I don't know, not that I'm aware of, but who knows? Maybe the county could get involved with, with the tribe. That would be wonderful. So maybe, not sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and so for some of these questions that will be answered as we go on, is there a way for folks to follow you? Is there a website where you'll be posting updates?
Yeah, our website, so guernevilleforestcoalition.org. We'll be posting updates there. So that's probably the best place, or you can, and certainly sign up for emails from us.
Okay, well, we actually got to the end and we really appreciate how engaged this group was. We're appreciated to everybody that stayed to the end and asked your questions and also offered points of view. And I think we will be able to send the video along with the great questions and answers in the chats. But Colin, thank you so much. And Maeve, thank you so much for coming and sharing your very inspiring story with us. And I will pass it back to Karen.
Okay, well, thank you for asking the questions, Kristen, and thank you so much, Colin and Maeve, for coming and telling us about your success. I think we all learned a lot, and it's very inspiring.
Great. Well, thank you.
So our next,
Thank you so much.
We can all go off mute.
Our next forum will be December 11th. That's a Monday, and we're going to have Gary Hughes from Fuel Watch, and he's going to talk about biomass. So I hope that many of you will come to that also. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.